Hello, welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. If you are new, welcome to my true crime channel where we discuss wrong-uns of all kinds from all over the world. And today's case begins in Helmshaw, a village in Rossendale in Lancashire in the UK, where on the 14th of January 2016, a 60-year-old businesswoman named Sadie Hartley has been out horse riding, and she's since arrived home at around 7:15 p.m. Around 45 minutes later, her doorbell rings and she goes to answer it, and the person at Sadie's front door immediately attacks her. She's stabbed up to 50 times by this person, who then flees the scene, leaving Sadie to die in her hallway alone. Now, no one knows this horrific attack has taken place. It's only the next day, when a colleague calls the police to say that Sadie hasn't been in touch, that the authorities turn up at Sadie's front door. Through the window they see Sadie on the floor and they break down the door to gain entry. Meanwhile, holidaying over in Hawaii, Sadie's daughter Charlotte, who has just got engaged the day before, receives the devastating call from police telling her that her mother has passed away. Sadie Catherine Cook was known as a wonderful person, loved by everyone who knew her. She grew up in 60s Newark in Nottinghamshire on a council house estate with her 6 siblings. Sadie was the third child, and though the family didn't have much money, they were abundant in love, and the family was very close-knit, raised by their father, who was a long-distance lorry driver, and their mother, who worked in the home as a stay-at-home parent. Sadie was always a bright and hard-working girl, and as a result she worked her way into Brighton Polytechnic, where she achieved a degree in microbiology and microchemistry. Sadie's incredible work ethic helped her quickly find a job in a pharmaceutical company named Janssen, and her work contributed to them becoming a global lead on product development. Sadie then used her talents to start up her own business in partnership with her friend Julie Taylor, which was, of course, incredibly successful, and Sadie became a wealthy woman in her own right. Coming from such humble beginnings, Sadie remained a very grounded person even after experiencing so much success. Also during this time, Sadie married a man named Gary Hartley, and they had 2 children, Harry and Charlotte. The couple were divorced after a while, but Sadie was a wonderful mother. She adored her children and they adored her. Sadie was the outdoorsy type. She loved horse riding and skiing and walking. She would often holiday alone, flying to far-flung destinations to trek and explore. It seems to me like Sadie was an all-round inspirational woman, a very driven, successful, hard worker, but also an amazing mother. So, as you can imagine, when Charlotte received that phone call in Hawaii, it was devastating for her and her brother. Sadie was looking forward to retiring and becoming a grandmother someday, and now all of that was gone. By the time she passed away, Sadie was not living alone. She lived with a 57-year-old man named Ian Johnson, and they were living together in Helmshaw since 2014 in Sadie's beautiful home in an affluent location. Ian and Sadie had known each other since the early 2000s, but they were on and off a lot. But then in mid-2014 they became an official couple, hence why Ian was now living with Sadie. But on the night that Sadie was killed, Ian wasn't there. 10 days prior to the attack, Ian had left to go to Switzerland on a skiing trip, and Sadie was due to meet him out there the next day, but of course she never made it. So the police have turned up to the home, broke in and found Sadie murdered in her hallway. Now, usually the first person police look at in a crime like this is the partner, but Ian was in Switzerland, so they ask him if he knows of anyone who may wish to hurt Sadie. And this is when Ian tells police about how in August, 5 months before the attack, their home had been robbed, and that had really shaken Sadie up. She'd barely been alone in the home since that had happened. So the police's first thought is, these robbers know the house, perhaps they've come back, and this time Sadie's been home and they've attacked her. But robberies rarely lead to a brutal stabbing, and if you watched my last few videos I've posted where a stabbing has taken place, you'll know that by now too. But if these robbers are responsible, then there's a chance that they could strike again, so the police need to act quickly. First, they look at where the home is situated, and it's in a very quiet, affluent street. In fact, it's only got one side of houses, the other side is just greenery, so unfortunately for police, there's very few people who would have been in that area at the time, so witnesses are hard to come by. But then Ian tells them something else that happened just 1 week before Sadie was killed, and this is very strange indeed. A week before the attack, Sadie was home alone, and at 9 p.m. she heard a knock at the door. She opened the door and saw someone she didn't recognise. It was a woman wearing a baseball cap standing there with what Sadie described as a cheap bunch of flowers in her hand, the kind she said you'd get from the local shop. The woman said, "Mrs. Hartley, these are for you." Sadie took them and asked who they were from, but the woman said she couldn't remember, and then she left very quickly off down the road. Sadie never did find out who they were from, but it did freak her out, so police make a note of this strange event in case it's connected. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, a barb from a stun gun is found inside the turtleneck of Sadie's jumper, which means that it's likely a stun gun was used on Sadie before she was killed. Police make an appeal for witnesses to come forward, but with Sadie living in a fairly secluded area, not much comes in. But they do find some CCTV belonging to the neighbours, which luckily has footage of Sadie's home. Now, the CCTV shows footage of the night of the murder, and this footage shows cars of a certain price point in the area, Porsches and such, but one car in particular that stops nearby catches the attention of police because it's a Renault Clio. Now, there's nothing wrong with Clios, but the fact of the matter is, in a street full of high-end cars, a Clio stands out. It drives past Sadie's home that evening, stops, and then leaves a few minutes later. Meanwhile, Ian provides some more information to the police, and this leads to a story which begins 4 or 5 years before the murder, so around 2011-2012. Now, Ian is a ski enthusiast, and he would frequently visit an indoor ski slope called the Chill Factor in Manchester. And whilst at the Chill Factor, he met a woman in her 30s who worked there named Sarah Williams. Now, even though Ian was off and on with Sadie at this point, he decided to exchange numbers with Sarah, who was 20 years his junior, and they began texting each other. It became very physical between the two very quickly, and they would meet up regularly at Ian's home. Sadie knew nothing about Sarah because Ian had his own place at the time, so it wasn't difficult for him to see another woman in secret. I think the way Ian saw it was he wasn't fully committed to Sadie, so seeing Sarah wasn't technically cheating, but he did keep her a secret from Sadie, so make of that what you will. Ian told police that there was no dating with him and Sarah, it was very much just physical, but they engage in some quite strange covert activities. For example, Sadie and Ian would go on holiday together and Sarah would already be there, staying in the same hotel. So whilst Ian was on holiday with Sadie, he'd also be seeing Sarah behind Sadie's back the whole holiday. So I guess they maybe got some kind of thrill out of Ian and Sadie being on holiday together and her not knowing that Sarah is also there staying in the same hotel. So this affair went on for a while, but then Sarah became very clingy and possessive, and Ian didn't like this, so he ended it with Sarah in mid-2014 and he decided to fully commit to Sadie. But Sarah didn't want it to end. She was smitten with Ian, so she continued to turn up at Ian's home, but he told her firmly to stop, and in the end she did. But Sarah was not happy about being dumped, so in her fury she wrote a very long, detailed letter to Sadie, telling her exactly what she and Ian had been up to. Sarah wrote, "We have been sleeping together and everything else that goes with it, week in and week out for some considerable time now. Have a look around the house. There's plenty of my things around the place. Has he even changed the sheets since we were last in there? She then goes on to taunt Sadie about how thrilling their time together was. Reading that must have been awful for Sadie, and she called Sarah incredibly upset and they had a conversation. Sarah hoped that this would mean that Sadie would now dump Ian and she'd get Ian back all to herself. But in fact, it had the opposite effect. They managed to put it behind them and Ian moved in with Sadie. Ian never saw Sarah again in person, but they did continue to text, exchanging explicit messages and photos from that point right up until Sadie was murdered. Of course, hearing this story, police want to check Sarah Williams out and find out who this woman is. Well, Sarah Williams had always been involved with older men. By the time she was 17, she was seeing a man named David Hardwick, who at the time was 57 years old. And from this point forward, for the next 18 years, David and Sarah had a physical and financial relationship. David would pay for holidays for them both and would give her living expenses and £75,000 towards a house. David was married and a father throughout, but his wife was okay with him seeing Sarah. Sarah had various other relationships with married men at the ski slope where she worked, but she would always continue to see David throughout, even when she was seeing Ian, most likely because there was the financial incentive to always stay with David. Now, as we know, by the time of Sadie's murder, Ian had finished it with Sarah over a year ago and they hadn't seen each other since then, aside from the texting. But police thought there's enough there to just double check what Sarah had been up to, just to rule her out. So they use mobile phone masts to trace where Sarah had been the last few days, and some interesting information comes up. Now, Sarah lives in Chester, but her phone pinged on a mast near to Sadie's home just a week before Sadie was murdered. But why would Sarah be there, 55 miles away from her home a week prior to the murder? Well, this date in particular is an important one, because if you remember, exactly a week before she was killed, Sadie received some flowers from an unknown woman. And based on this, police arrest Sarah on suspicion of murder. Now, for someone with no criminal record, Sarah is pretty calm. She, of course, denies Sadie's murder, saying she was sick that day and was at home in bed. In the meantime, police are searching Sarah's home and it's all been scrubbed with bleach. But in her bleaching frenzy, Sarah has missed a bit. A speck of blood is found in her bathroom and police take it away for testing. And back at the station, Sarah is asked about Ian and the letter she sent Sadie. When asked if she's jealous of Sadie, Sarah replies no. Anyone who's been continually cheated on isn't someone to be jealous of, so she had no reason to kill Sadie. On the night of the flower delivery, witnesses had said that they'd seen a woman in a silver Astra car with a bald man, and that's who delivered the flowers. So police asked Sarah if she was the one who delivered the flowers to Sadie. But Sarah denies delivering the flowers, and in fairness, we know that Sadie knew who Sarah was. So if she'd have delivered the flowers, Sadie would have known immediately who Sarah was, and she'd never have opened the door to her. But we also know that Sarah said it was a woman who gave her the flowers, and the only other person in the silver Astra was a bald man. So maybe Sarah wasn't guilty of this crime. So we have two cars now connected to this case. We have a silver Astra spotted on the night of the flower delivery and a Renault Clio spotted in the area the night of the murder. But police have no idea who owns either of these cars and neither car belongs to Sarah. But then police get a breakthrough. A detective on the case turns up at the house of a friend of Sarah's named Katrina Walsh, and they notice a silver Astra parked up on her driveway. They knock at the door and Katrina answers, and it's immediately clear that Katrina has alopecia, so has a mostly bald head. The police were told by a witness that the flower delivery was made by a woman and a bald man in a silver Astra, but Perhaps they were mistaken and their bald man was actually a bald woman. So of course, the first thing police do is to check Katrina's phone to see what mast it pinged off on the night of the flower delivery, and lo and behold, Katrina's phone was found to be in the Helmshore area, close to Sadie's house that night. CCTV footage is then found by police showing Sarah Williams buying flowers in a shop with someone who's wearing a baseball cap, and Katrina Walsh, because of her alopecia, always wears baseball caps. And so Katrina Walsh is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Sadie Hartley alongside Sarah Williams. Sarah, meanwhile, is denying all knowledge of even knowing where Helmshore is, but after hearing that Katrina has now been arrested too, Sarah, for the first time, starts to look a bit shaken. So Katrina Walsh is brought in and she immediately tells police that she has a condition which affects her memory. She says that she can't remember anything beyond 3 days, so it's going to be tricky for her to be able to answer any questions. Now, we know Sarah Williams' history with Sadie and Ian, but who is Katrina Walsh and how does she know Sarah? Well, Katrina Walsh was described as an intelligent, artistic and eccentric woman who was a little lacking in social skills. Katrina liked motorbikes and even had one of her own. She used tarot cards a lot and made jewellery. But most of all, she enjoyed horse riding and visiting the local stables. It was at the stables where she met Sarah Williams, and Sarah was very young at this point, about 12 years old, but even though there was a 20-year age gap, the pair became friends. Now, Katrina had been married to a man named Kevin Walsh, but their marriage had broken down because Kevin had an affair and left Katrina. By this point, she and Sarah were good friends, and Sarah helped her get through this difficult period, which consolidated their closeness. And their friendship continued for a long time. They'd do everything together, but they got so close that some described their friendship as unhealthily close. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's said that Katrina looked up to Sarah. She was awestruck by her. And Katrina is now in the police station being questioned, and after telling police about her memory condition, she then starts to panic, saying she knows something's happened but she doesn't remember exactly what. Meanwhile, police are reviewing CCTV video footage from outside of Sarah's house on the evening that the flowers were delivered to Sadie. This footage shows Sarah leaving her house and getting into a car. This car pulls up outside of Sadie's house and it shows not Sarah, but the driver delivering the flowers. And this is why Sadie didn't recognise them, because that person is Katrina Walsh. Footage is also found from the night of the murder, and it shows Sarah again leaving her house when she was apparently sick in bed and getting into a Renault Clio. Police challenge Sarah about this wealth of CCTV footage, but she now shuts down, answering every question with no comment. I think Sarah's starting to panic a bit. Back at Sarah's home, a Nokia phone is found under her bed, and the phone calls made on it give police their next lead. Sarah's phone has a call made to Sadie's workplace, but why would Sarah call Sadie's place of work? Could it be to track her movements, perhaps? The phone also shows several other calls, and these numbers are all belonging to people who were selling their cars. The final number called was to someone selling a Renault Clio. So police contact this person who sold the car, and they confirm that it was Sarah Williams who bought it in cash. But there's been no sign of this car since the night of the murder, so where's it gone? The best way for police to track this car down is to use number plate recognition, but unbeknownst to them, the number plate had been doctored. The reg number had a 3 in it, but that 3 had been covered over with black tape to make it appear as an 8, so that it couldn't be traced after the murder. So clearly someone didn't want police finding it. But luckily, due to some good police work, they are still able to locate the car, and it's found in a car park 55 miles away from the murder scene. The car's taken away for testing and, unsurprisingly, blood belonging to Sadie is found inside. Not only that, but the blood taken from the sink in Sarah's very bleached bathroom is also proven to belong to Sadie Hartley. These are major pieces of very damning forensic evidence connecting Sarah and Sadie, but there's still the question of Katrina and her involvement in all of this. So police are interviewing Katrina and she's told them about her bad memory and how she has to write a lot down. She also confides in police, telling them that she's terrified of Sarah and whatever Sarah tells her to do, she would do it. But because of her memory, she has no idea of what she's done.
Yeah. All I can remember at the moment is that I knew that Sarah had killed someone. I'd been terrified for days, absolutely terrified for days while she was around.
The very first question I asked you was, did you kill Sadie Hartley? You said no. And then I said, do you know who killed? And you said yes. Who killed Sadie Hartley?
Sarah Williams.
How do you know that?
Because she's at the core of this knot of panic in me. But I can't remember that she killed her.
What can you remember that terrifies you about Sarah?
I think I started to suspect that she was a psychopath. And that I was very close friends with the psychopath.
Katrina's behaviour is all over the place. She's saying she remembers nothing, but then she's saying she's scared of Sarah and remembers giving the flowers to Sadie for Sarah because she knew Sarah wanted Ian back. Then she goes into an almost trance-like state. She keeps saying that Sarah said she would kill Sadie and that the two of them had bought a stun gun on a road trip to Germany. But then she says she thought it was all just a game and never thought Sarah would go through with it. Katrina then goes into full panic mode, repeating, she's done it, she's killed somebody, she's done it, and I have the evidence to prove it. She tells police that she has, on Sarah's orders, hidden the stun gun, a large knife, and burned some clothes.
What evidence is it that you've hidden?
I've hidden a zapper, a knife, the soles of some boots.
Tell me what a zapper is.
It's a black thing with a squeezy, and it's got prongs, and it makes a horrible crackly noise.
The next item on this list, what does that say?
A knife.
Right, tell me about that.
It's a knife, and I suspect at the time I suspected it's killed somebody.
Okay, why do you suspect that?
Because I've been told to destroy it.
Who by?
Sarah. She got in my car and gave me bags with instructions to burn the clothes and the towels and everything, and utterly destroy everything else.
Okay.
I opened the bag. I opened the bag. Go on. She's done it. She's done it. She's done it.
She's done what?
She's killed somebody. She's killed somebody.
How do you know that?
There's a knife and the zapper and.
Alright. Okay.
I've got evidence.
The police ask Katrina why Sarah would trust her with all of this evidence if she wasn't complicit in this murder, but she says that it was done to frame her. If police ever suspected Sarah was responsible, she'd blame it on Katrina.
Why has she trusted you to get rid of the evidence? If you're not involved in this, why has she trusted you?
She wants to frame me for it. She wants to frame me for it or kill me and frame me for it. At that stage, that's all I can think.
Why didn't you walk into a police station and speak to the police?
Because whenever I was that frightened, I was more frightened of her than anything else.
Okay.
Sadly, Kate, it shouldn't be me that you're sorry to, but...
I'm very, very deeply...
But you shouldn't be sorry to me.
No, I'm deeply sorry. I mean, that's the... oh, God.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Katrina tells police that she now remembers where she hid the evidence, so in a rare move, the police actually take her there. Katrina takes police directly to a patch of land on a farm, where they dig up a large blood-stained knife, a stun gun with the barb missing, and a car key belonging to a Renault Clio. And it's at this point that on the 20th of January 2016, Sarah Williams is charged with the murder of Sadie Hartley, to which she has no response whatsoever. But still, what was Katrina's involvement in all of this? Did Sarah force her friend to get involved in a murder? Well, police conduct a search of Katrina's house, and as we know, Katrina writes a lot down because of her memory, and as a result they find very detailed diaries in her home, and what officers read is shocking to say the least. Police discover that not only has Katrina helped Sarah in hiding evidence, but she and her good friend have been planning this murder for 18 months. From the moment Sarah failed to split Ian and Sadie up, Sarah had decided that there was only one way to get Ian back, and that was to take Sadie's life. The diary notes how Sarah and Katrina purchased a GPS tracker, and they fitted it to Ian's car so that they could track his movements and find out where he and Sadie lived. Once they found out where she lived, Sarah would sit outside of Sadie's home and workplace watching her, learning her routine so that she would know when Sadie would be alone in the house. Katrina's diary reads, "We're seriously talking of getting rid of her opponent. I agree, it's probably a good play. She does seem to be totally evil." Later she writes, "Wow, I may get to be instrumental in helping remove the awful woman. This may happen. Wow, I'm unexpectedly excited by it. Was so buzzing I needed a southern comfort to wind down a bit." Katrina goes on to write, "I am going to be involved now, heaven help me. I have no moral qualms, just a serious don't let us get caught twinge. Sarah has ordered a GPS tracker on my credit card to be delivered here and will give me cash for it. That's fine as I'm not going to be involved at the sharp end." Katrina also writes how they tried to get her ex-husband Kevin to kill Sadie, but he refused, so they had to go ahead with it themselves. She also writes how she and Sarah went on a road trip to Germany to buy the stun gun, and how they bought boots several sizes too large for them in case any footprints were collected at the murder scene. She writes how 2 days after the murder, she and Sarah watched the Mamma Mia DVD and danced around the room singing along to Dancing Queen. And in case you're wondering about her memory loss, Katrina had gone back to her diaries and ripped some pages out, so she'd clearly remembered what she'd written in there and how incriminating it was. But to be honest, I don't know why she didn't just dispose of the diaries altogether, because all of them are incriminating, and I've no idea what she ripped out if it was even worse than what she'd left in. After reading these diaries and seeing how much glee Katrina had taken in the planning of Sadie's murder, police came to the conclusion that it was highly unlikely Katrina was forced to help Sarah, nor did she have any memory problems. Katrina had put on quite a show of vulnerability and confusion for police in those first few days of questioning, and it may have worked if those diaries showing her true feelings hadn't been discovered. So, Katrina Walsh is then also charged for the murder of Sadie Hartley. On July 5th, 2016, the murder trial begins at Preston Crown Court. Sarah and Katrina plead not guilty, forcing Sadie's family to go through the trauma of a trial. The two women point their fingers directly at each other, taking absolutely none of the blame. The evidence is presented at trial: the knife with the blood on it, the stun gun, the barb from the stun gun found in Sadie's jumper, Sadie's blood found in Sarah's bathroom and in the Clio car, and the reams of CCTV footage showing the women delivering the flowers and, a week later, at Sadie's house the night of the murder. It turned out that it wasn't the first time Sarah had acted in an obsessive way around men. A few years prior to the murder, Sarah had been involved with a married man, and she sent that man's wife a letter too, just like she did with Sadie. And this letter read, "I think you should know about the sort of scumbag you are married to." She wrote that she was having an affair and now pregnant by this man, and she enclosed a scan of a baby. As it turns out, she was seeing this man, but she wasn't pregnant. She used someone else's scan, hoping that this might force the woman to leave her husband. And this wasn't the only example either. So as you can see, the behaviour was already present in Sarah, and she had a history of obsessive and extreme behaviour around men. It comes out in trial that 10 days before the murder, Sarah texted Katrina saying, "Don't forget to crack on with your shopping. Suddenly it's time." In response to this text, the next day, Katrina was seen on CCTV buying a large knife, which would become the murder weapon. Then, a week before the murder, the two women gave Sadie the flowers to double check that they had the right house and the right woman. Now, Sarah's guilt by this point is evident, but the prosecution need to prove that Katrina is equally guilty. Her own lawyer says Katrina is vile, but never genuinely believed that Sarah would go through with the murder. So this is when the prosecution point out just how involved Katrina was. She went to Germany to get the stun gun, she bought the tracking device for Ian's car, she helped buy the Clio, she doctored the licence plate with tape, she bought the knife, and so much more, all backed up by her own diary entries. Ian is then put on the stand and questioned about his relationship with Sarah, and he of course had no idea what Sarah was going to do, but given that he continued to text Sarah behind Sadie's back right up until Sadie's death, doesn't make him look good. He describes himself as an unwitting fool, saying he had no idea something as horrific as this would happen to Sadie because of his relationship with Sarah, and he's very apologetic to Sadie's family, although I'm not sure whether they forgave him or not. After a 7-week trial, the jury go away to deliberate, and on the 17th of August 2016, after 7 hours, their verdicts are unanimous. They find Sarah Williams guilty of murder, and she is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years. Katrina Walsh is also found guilty of murder and is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years behind bars. Judge Turner speaks to both women on sentencing, but I think what he said to Katrina was especially interesting, and I do find in a lot of these cases the judges have such a way with words. They're able to summarise what's happened so well. So I'll just read out a little bit of what the judge said to Katrina. "Let no one make the mistake of thinking that this was a crime of passion. It was a crime of obsession, of arrogance, of barbarity, but above all, it was a crime of pure evil. You, Walsh, are every bit as morally degenerate as Williams. No wonder you've been the best of friends over so many years. Walsh putting on an ostentatious and devious show of feigned mental impairment to the police in a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of what you had done. You appear from the contents of your diary to have acted under the delusion that as long as you were not there, quote, at the sharp end, you would not go to prison. How wrong you were." Neither Sarah nor Katrina have any reaction to the sentencing, and they are taken away to start their sentences. Sadie's family, after the trial, said they were absolutely devastated by what happened. Her children said that their mother's death had left a huge void. They said she was just a lovely, trustworthy, kind, loving woman and just cared about everybody. She was an inspiration to everyone around her, an adventurer who lit up the room. She was perfect. This is, without doubt, a shocking and tragic case. Sadie was clearly an incredible and inspirational woman. She had so much to live for, and it was cut short for no reason by two people who could have only wished to have been the woman that Sadie was. Thankfully, if nothing else, they are behind bars now, where they belong. And that's it. I hope you found this case interesting. If you did, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. My social media handles are down below in the description box if you'd like to follow me over on there too. I'm so glad to be back. I'm so sorry I was away for so long. I have missed you all a great deal. Thank you for staying with me. You're the best. Have a great day, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.